Hello, welcome to another edition of Draft Science and such. Anyway, I have to wait for the other window to start its whatever, and then I can pause it, and then we'll be off to the fun. Anyway, so I did post a link below this, the bottom link. There's a link to the room. Should have labeled it the room link, but I'm not going to bother. It's the room link. Yeah. So I don't know. If you don't label things, people can't figure it out. So somebody remind me to point out that the room link is in the description. I suppose I could post it in the chat. I don't know. Now you can't post links in the chat. It's just such a silly to sit there and put the stupid link in there. Yeah, I mean, people can figure it out. They really can. And if they can't, they're probably not worth talking to. So anyway, lots to, I'm still thinking on the mechanism of the filter. So gotta do my writing down of the keywords here. That does this thing that changes whether something is going to reflect or which is absorb. So reflection is absorption. Is absorption. And the filter is going to decide whether something, a collection of stuff, is, well, that's the filter actually. And so the filter is essentially dictating whether there'll be a reflection, which is an absorption, or a, just go straight through it. Pass by without changing anything. The universe remains the same, so to speak. The interaction is moot. So that's the kinetic part, meaning there's no difference between the two things hitting each other and the two things reflecting. Same difference. Why did the window pop up? Strange. Anyway, so I was thinking about, so anyway, at the bottom of the links, there's a link to a three-color rendition, the orbits that I was talking about the last time, which is nice that somebody made that. But I was thinking about it and saying that, no, that's probably not the way it works. I was thinking that you could have something of the same mass. You could have a hurricane that's 50 miles across, and you could have a hurricane that's 100 miles across, and a hurricane that's 150 miles across, and they would all be traveling. The outside of them would have a different speed, even though it's the same speed. So technically, you could have the same speed. The actual speed is the same, but you travel less. You accomplish less forward distance because of the fact that your speed is arced more. So it's that ice skater thing. With the arms out, they spin slow. With the arms in, they spin fast. So it's the same skater. They're just spinning faster or slower. So I was figuring that's the explanation for the different color emissions of light at different frequencies. Is the fact that when the arms are in, you'll end up with blue light, and when the arms are out, you'll end up with red light. So maybe I'll say it that way. Arms in, red. No, arms out. Say it right. Arms in, blue. And obviously, the whole spectrum would be tighter for the cosmic rays, very fat kind of an electron producing radio waves, let's say. that kind of a thing. And so that might have something to do with how fast the electron is moving also. If spin is a reflection of velocity. Spin, SB, SP. Boy, I cannot spell today. Spin versus velocity. Question mark. Yes, the spin cause velocity in micro products, the small bits. Interesting question, perhaps. All right, so I was watching the Apopopoulos guy, Ken, the photographer guy. And I was thinking he's having a photo contest. It's like for 10 days, taking a macro picture. Very nice prize, actually. A strobe, which I could really use. But no, not likely to win. But I was thinking of trying to find an entry that would be suitable in this, in this argument of particle versus wave physics. In the macro sense, I mean, obviously, I can't find tiny fish, but maybe I can find something similar in nature, some tiny thing that does the schooling thing, or does the whirlpool thing even. I could contrive a circumstance, I suppose, and make an image that looks suitable to my purposes. So I might play some of his video in here. We'll see how things go, just to get to the incomprehensibility of it all. And he's describing magnetism and the plane of inertia, or whatever the hell he calls it, the bit in between the two poles, line of demarcation or whatever. But anyway, he's denying the existence of the domains and the stuff that I think is just so well documented as a fact. That they do flip inside of substances, and those are essentially a demonstration that a magnet is basically just made up of a bunch of nuclear magnets, a bunch of atomic magnets. It's like the gravity thing. You're gravitationally affected on your nuclear bits are affected by gravity. I might as well write that down again. I gotta put all these notes together, and I won't know what they mean. So I mean, gravity is a nuclear force, and for magnetism, it's also an atomic circumstance. Oh, there's pyro.
Hey, I'm not drinking, so I'm going to be mean, just to warn you.
Well, I'd rather, frankly, I'm so sick of drunks, to tell you the truth.
I know. Even though I'm a particularly nice one, I know what you mean. Me too.
Yeah, it's the whole pothead, LSD. I found reality through, masturbation. I'm just.
Oh, I'm sure that's how you found reality. Be honest. Back in the 70s.
No, I found it to be it's a huge distraction and waste of time. Like I said, to me, I just compare it to masturbating. It's.
I know, but you still went through that way, didn't you? You used to hide vodka bottles on the way to school in junior high or something.
Yeah, that's the only way I could get through it. And I still drink, but I just don't do the drunk thing.
Well, you're just lucky that you got to stop going to the institutions.
Well,
most of us had to keep going. It's really hard to deal with.
Well, I know, but I didn't drink when I was working. Well, and afterward.
Well, that's why you dropped out of the whole thing.
Yeah.
All out of the house work. It's like, fuck this shit. I'm too sober for it.
Well, I tell you, in a way, it might be true because it was, bartending as much as I really enjoyed it, but it's a people kind of thing. And it's also a human tragedy kind of thing, because you just kind of see, people's lives turn into nothing. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, totally. There's plenty of examples in my family and stuff, but mostly highly functional. So you see how it still happens, even if you're highly functional and never lose your house and stuff. Or people that don't beat their family or yell at them. Even then, there's still this the case. So,
well, like I said, these were rich people. I mean, I worked at a high.
That's what I mean. Highly functional.
Yeah.
No, and most of the rich people, California, I'm sure the East Coast is similar. They're all come from partying and stuff, so they have the biggest problems of all. I know the politicians all do. It's all alcoholism's huge out there and in the functional world, and you can't get blamed for it really unless you get caught in your car. Which in the old days, even if you're caught in your car, it's like, oh, Dr. Smith, you should go home. But I've been not wanting to drink except for on the weekend. I was going to say, is one way to not have to go cold turkey. Though right now we're on this diet that involves no drinking or smoking, but I went and got a little cigarettes anyway. I'm on the partial version of it. But and my one excuse on the weekend that broke me off the weekend, though, was that I go into the office. I work from home, but I'm going in once a week on Tuesday. And when I come home on Tuesday, it's like, no, I definitely need to have a beer. So it's true, working from home and stuff makes it much more doable to do that. When you have to go into an office, it's real hard not to say, I should have a couple drinks after work. It's not healthy.
Yeah, well, it kind of depends. Like I said, I guess I was lucky that it didn't do that much for me. Some people, like I said, especially being drunk, I was not, I was kind of uncomfortable with it. Gave me enough anxiety to,
Well, and it wasn't very long, but but on the other hand, I wasn't meaning that the drinking is unhealthy. I still think that it can be a relaxant and used in moderation, blah blah blah. I mean, the going to these fucking corporate office environments is unhealthy. And right now, I've interviewed in the last couple of years for some of the main places, and you can't believe what they're like big cubes with 4 or 5 people in them. And I don't mind cube walls. That's actually fine if you do what you're supposed to do, which is buy a bunch, and then everybody gets a little bit of an office and puts a poster of their favorite, hottie or whatever they want to put up. But 4 or 5 people in there, even the managers, the local, programming level lead programmers, they'd call them, and the cube walls are only like 3.5 feet tall. So you're still looking over into the other cube next to you and you got a bunch of Asperger type functional people. I gotta say, they're not gotta be, because there's a lot of smart ones there, and they must make a lot of accommodations. I know of some people that are like, well, they don't really have to go into the office, but what the ones that do, and the new graduates, what they do before they burn out, at least, is just like wear noise canceling headphones and put themselves in a sonic universe. What about all the fucking peripheral vision? I can't work with that shit. I can have peripheral vision, like moving TVs like you do, a lot of TVs on, but I turn them off and mute which one. It's not some other guys having a fucking coffee conversation. And if I can hear him muted over there, okay, I'll wear my headphones. Sound works different than sight, but to have to, it's just crazy. And that's like, this is people that have enough money to give you free vegan food or Chinese, everything you want, free Wi-Fi, drive you 100 miles to work on a company bus. They choose. Everybody could have an office with hard walls at Google. They got shit tons of money. They choose to do that. It's a Borg thing.
Yeah, that's it. It's a Borg thing. So actually, that's all you need to say is they've taken some common denominator and said this is what makes a good work environment. But yeah, that kind of excludes 40% of the people who just won't be able to stomach it. They just won't be able to tolerate it.
Well, or they do, and if they totally go crazy, you lose some of them. But a lot of them that go semi-crazy stay functional. Get some coping mechanism, if not alcohol, something else, or consumption or whatever, or you becoming a Trump voter, whatever, some crazy shit. And the stress just eats them up in some sense. And then this whole society takes the hit because not only, if somebody goes crazy and they should have medical care, that's a relatively minor cost compared to all the people that go crazy and then climb up, and there are CEOs, for fuck's sake.
Well, I just don't think they have any hard science because I don't think they've done enough experiments. But yeah, I think it does cost them more than they gain from any sociology they force on people. I don't think whatever they're trying to do, the community thing, I don't think it's all that productive. But
no, I think they're going to get burnt out on it because it isn't. A much more enlightened thing in that industry anyway is go back to letting people work from home. But see, there's a reversal of that, because the idea is you should shove them all together, and nobody really wants to plan, so you got to put them so they talk a lot.
Well, they have the technology now to do it. You know, before the problem was, like, I had a neighbor who did that, and obviously he just cheated all the time. You know what I mean? He was playing video games and on the clock and all that kind of shit, and you know, he just goofing off, sleeping, blah blah. But yeah, now they have cameras and all this other stuff, so you can really, you know, you don't have to just monitor what they're doing on their computer. You could just physically monitor them. And in that sense, I think they can fix the problem. You know, people will have to be at their desk. Okay, yeah, they don't have to be 100% functional, but they got to be there, you know, and you can see them there, and they got to have the right thing on the fucking screen.
See, I don't think that. I have a different view in that. I don't think that's that necessary. You judge people on the output of their code and their work. So in this work that I do anyway, it's like if somebody wants to take a break and play video games, it looks really weird at work. But if they're at home, it could basically be okay if they hit these milestones. You know, you make people say,
well, I know,
this done by Friday.
That's not a manager's kind of way of looking at things. They're trying to squeeze the most productivity possible out of you, and they're really just going to find it obnoxious if you're going to take an hour and a half to eat an orange. You know what I'm saying? They're going to notice that that's a lack of productivity.
Well, with the virtual
regardless of how good you are, they want to.
With the virtual office, you do have to be responsive. It's hard to stop somebody, and you wouldn't really want to try to get to that point. It would be pointless at that point to stop them from playing a video game or playing videos or checking their Facebook.
Well, I just say it's okay.
But what you do make them responsive. They're actually more responsive than in the office, because instead of having to go by and see they're not at their desk, where are they? You chit chat to them Skype style, and it's like, even if they're away from their desk, if they're back within the next half an hour, they motherfucking say hello, and you know what I mean? So people end up staying at their office more.
I'm just saying that if I was going to do this, then I would do it with this provision. I'm just saying this. I think there's lots of people who accept the higher security, you know what I mean, that they're going to be watched, and that they'll be at home, and they'll totally accept that, because, and it also gives the managers also, it's not as personal, you know what I mean? So if he wants to, if a manager wants to nag me about something or rag at me, it's going to be so much easier for me to do it if I'm just on a monitor. You know what I mean? It's so much easier to insult somebody, or, you know what I mean? You don't have to worry about being delicate. You can just say, hey, could you get some more work done, fucker? You know, you can say that on a computer.
We don't stay on the monitor, but you can get called at any moment. And the chat programs, of course, light up green if the person's been typing or not. So theoretically, you can tell if they're typing on their computer. But not in my case, because I run the chat on one computer and I'm typing on a different one and stuff.
Well, I'm just saying that the problem is now moot in terms of the fact that you have the capacity to monitor people. So I'm just saying that they kind of got rid of the biggest liability of working at home, which was people weren't very fucking productive. So that's the argument.
I'm conceding to you some of the things you said are like, well, that's overkill. But I would agree to them. People would agree to them, because it's so less obtrusive than having to hang out in a cubicle with 5 other people.
Yeah, I mean, to be able to work in your own controlled environment, you know, and have the security of your own home, and to be able to do a couple of multitaskings, you know what I mean, babysit or do something else, and work, is just a huge advantage. And they ought to take advantage of that advantage. It's a huge advantage. They ought to take advantage of it, you know.
Yeah. No, and the whole commute things that people do.
Yeah, what a waste of money. Yeah, I mean,
even a short commute adds up. But these days, people, I know not a shortage of people like in California, a 2-hour commute each way. That's a little extreme, but I know plenty in my family, met several examples.
Well, I'm just saying, our whole state is, you know, 50% of the people, you know, go to New York every day, and it's, who the hell wants to do that?
So what is that right off the bat? Like, if you have a 1-hour each way commute, which with traffic would these days not be extreme at all, that's just 10 hours.
Yeah, and you're killing $50 in tolls and expense. You know, I mean, it's expensive as fuck.
But anyway, I just saw your room open, so it's physics.
That's the purpose of it. Yeah, well, you know, obviously for a good reason, I think. But yeah, I don't see much point in the philosophy rooms, to tell you the truth. Just, you know, it's like your room, okay? It's another, whatever, 8 hours of mixed conversations. You know, a lot of it's redundant. Same arguments made, and then, you know, a big huge pile of last week was just wasted on idiots talking about how they didn't land on the moon. I mean, for fuck's sake.
I know, that was kind of crazy. I kind of think I do want to focus it. Well, it was focused last 4 months or so by having Quintica had taken interest, and even though he didn't came, Vic came, he got some other people. And so we talked about this same thing over and over until we really just beat the examples they have into the ground. I don't feel like they're listening. I feel like right now, people don't know. Here's something you get, I think, that people don't get, but people would think you don't get it, but you do, which is you have to remember more than one story. You got your story and you figured out it was right, but you know the other person's story, right? And if it's a Sherlock Holmes thing, it's because maybe it's going to be the other story at the end or whatever. But even when that isn't going to happen, you remember the other person's story, at least just to know where they're coming from, or if you're going to try to convince them. And people don't do that at all. Like, so they tell you why, of course, if you see a guy with a red scarf, you're going to have to shoot him. And it's understandable if you do, of course. And they don't remember what the other person's story is. It's like, here's where we disagree. And you get really upset at other people's opinion. But I've noticed over the years, you remember what they are. When you're insulting them, you can tell sometimes you're like, you say this and this. Well, fuck you. But you know what I mean? You actually have paid attention. And it's like a mental disability. I felt we were in that hole there with the same things of like, you don't have to tell me that example. I've explained to you, I understand that's your story. Here's my comparative story, and that's where it doesn't go. But I would like to double down on social issues, and we have IRV is up for a vote here in Maine. So it really should be talked about. That could break out, you know.
Yeah, just it's such vested interest politics now that I don't, you know, people think it's you know, some kind of offense to the system, you know, and there's so many people invested in the system.
I know, but it's so lame. People have said that to me. Oh, but this, and oh, but we do it this way, and or tradition, or just the lamest things. And it just won't stand up, I think, especially if it starts at the lower level where it's really fucking expensive for real runoffs. And I don't know on the East Coast, but in the West Coast, all the little towns have runoffs. And any town of any size has a protest guy that keeps them from 50%. And a lot of little towns will too. You know, they'll have 2 liberals run or whatever. And then and then there's a runoff. And then it's like, that's expensive. That costs those towns $500,000 and shit. So, you know, or whatever it is, depending on the size.
Well, that's why they got to do it with the computer
thing.
Money. Well, that's why they got to do it with the computer thing. You know.
Yeah, IRV. Of course, they need to use computers, but with IRV, you could do it by paper, and it would at least work mathematically, and you don't need an extra election.
Well, that's what I'm just saying, that you could just have the ranked voting. You know, it's the same principle, but I just mean, yeah, the idea is that
you know this, I told you before. You remember the IRV? This is kind of a science topic because the whole point of IRV is even more basic. It's math. Our system is mathematically broke. But I told you we have I think statewide elections would all be IRV. I'd have to look it up to not misquote the details. But in Maine, it was an initiative.
Yeah.
So it's going to be up.
Well, it's good that they're, you know, I'm just saying, but like I said, I'm still going to argue that until you break, you know, to break the parties, you have to break the geography problem, you know, because that's the thing that just keeps you getting stuck with 2 crappy candidates. I mean, instant runoff voting doesn't do you any good when there's nobody to vote for.
You know what? That's another thing that should be started at the state level. You put that in state houses where they have part-time legislatures anyway. And, you know, you might get away with it, especially if you could find some money angle of saving money or someone.
Well, there's no reason, actually.
It's hard to sell that one.
I don't think it is. You could just make to start off, you can make the easy argument. The Congress should be full of representatives that were affirmatively voted for. So you would never have a district where half the people are denied representation. So you would get positive votes to get into the Congress, not negative votes. You know, you'd have to actually get positive votes. So you'd have to run, say, 2 candidates from each district or whatever. But I'm just saying.
Maybe that's a selling point that you've always said. It is probably the best, most understandable one. That, yeah, in our system, in the sense of why it's mathematically really broken in like bad way, totally wrong, is like you're saying, in our system, some of your votes are negative. They just subtract against the other votes. The loser's votes subtract against the winner's.
Well, I'm just saying, it just encourages encourages segregation, because the only way you get representation is to be a segregated minority. So all majorities get represented, and the only minorities that get represented are ones that are segregated in majoritarian districts. So that's the biggest flaw of that's not what you would call a rational democracy, right? You're supposed to be creating a representative democracy, and yet
Yeah.
you're telling all the people who have a minority point of view, but not for you. Okay, yeah, it's representative for us majorities, but it's not representative for you minorities. So any
So what I'm curious.
any desegregated minority is just out of luck in a geographic system.
So I totally understand how this would work, and with IRV it could work really pretty simply. But what do you do with the people that don't get enough votes? So let's say a lot of them would. Let's
Well,
say for simplicity, they all fit in one range, like one representative's worth of people were split into 20 different, fringe voters. What do you do then? You have a lottery, another election?
no.
Just
You
curious.
just have a right to pass on. So if I run and I only get one vote, you vote for me. Let's say I own Pyro's vote. Then what I have to do once I'm declared inviolable, right? I can't win. I only got one vote. I have to forward my vote to somebody who has more votes than me. So I could give it to a guy with 2 votes, and then he would be declared inviolable, and then he could give it to a guy with 5 votes. So you just percolate it up to
right.
the best possible choice made by the person you voted for. So
In a way,
the choice is still protected in the sense the person who's going to control your vote is still a guy you voted for. Right.
Yeah, you could have like it's like if yeah, I could see. And also, so it'd be like too, if a bunch of people didn't have enough votes, they could have like a mini convention kind of thing, but just brokered online,
Well, I'm just saying that the point is
that
if somebody voted for me, right, and I can't get elected, and the only 2 choices are Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton, then I have the responsibility to choose one. You know what I'm saying? One of them has to be the winner, so then I have to choose, and so I either do the.
So what about this other way?
I'm just saying that people have to trust me to make that because they made the vote. Well, I'm just saying I don't think you can't cut the computer minutia any thinner because there's always going to be where you end up.
These aren't complaints. I just think they're.
I just mean you're going to start randomizing it. You know what I'm saying? And so then it'll end up being a little bit too much of the luck of the draw because the computer won't be able to make distinctions because of the number of votes.
Them broker it out.
So I'm just saying you're still leaving the human element in it. But I mean, the point is that whoever I vote for, I'm basically voting for somebody I trust. And so I'm just saying that's a true enough statement. I basically made a contract. If he fucks me, he fucks me. But I'm just saying I voted for him because I thought he had good judgment.
And right. And so what about this other mathematical case? If let's say you needed 1 million or whatever it is, 500,000 votes, and you get, twice as much, I guess you could give away your extra 1 million votes and appoint someone else.
No. They automatically go to the next choice. So you just take the people who.
Oh, of course. I'm sorry.
So it's only the first choices go to the guy.
And so right, of course.
But there's still a little bit of randomness in that, right? Because whoever gets chosen to be the first 250,000 or 300,000 is still going to be a.
That's the point of it being IRV is that only the people that don't make the threshold of votes have to do some sort of.
Yeah, so it's just a number of rules. You know what I'm saying? It's just like a program. It's just a level of rules. It just follows the rules. So the first, the first vote that goes to a guy is the guy who has the most choices. And this is the top of the list. So you do those you do those first. You know what I mean? The guys who have more than one candidate. I mean, that kind of thing, and they go first or they go last.
It's interesting. This would avoid people wasting their vote in the other direction. Like people talk about you voted for the minority candidate and you wasted your vote for the guy, that came in second. But this is the other way. Like when we overvote for someone and they get way more votes than they needed, and we could have voted for a minority. In this case, that would actually happen because we'd rank it, and on the second round, the minority guy wouldn't actually be a minority, and he would get elected.
Well, I'm just saying it just fixes, it pretty much.
Well, it fixes everything.
Yeah, it kind of guarantees that you can't get catastrophically fucked. Okay.
Yeah. Even if you ignored it mathematically, even if you ignored the people that didn't get the threshold and just say, I guess Congress has 3 less people this year, it would be like on that scale, 1 or 2. But I like brokering it because what that would mean is all the kind of fringe people that just ran and got at least 1 vote to log in and get to argue about it, they would have a say. It'd be an interesting conversation. It'd be an interesting little political sum up of an election. Those guys battling out the last, who would they agree on, So anyway, I think that's a great idea. I think that's a hard one to activate for, but so many interesting things have happened politically that were supposed to be impossible, from the breakup of countries and all kinds of things. The majority vote not winning in things, which I always knew before and thought was told that would never happen.
Yeah, I know,
So
but
if IRV comes, I did not see that one coming up on the radar. People seemed so obtuse to it. So if even that's coming up, then yeah, I don't see why geographic representation can't take a big hit.
Yeah, I'm just saying, I see lots of obstacles just because people want simple answers. You know,
It's hard to
I
sell.
mean, Trump is just such an obvious example of, you know, just give me, just, you know, as much as they complained and complained, and this guy is all talk, you know, simplistic fences. You know, let's build a wall, right? Let's not solve the problem the simple way. Even if we could agree on solving the problem, which is the problem anyways, we couldn't agree on solving the problem. But I mean, we have other tools to solve the problem, you know, social security numbers. You know, let's use them rationally.
Yeah, that's just crazy, but I do hope he's going to implode. I do think that's going to happen. He started saying some things that made me think he's getting ready for the excuse.
Yeah, he's got Ross Perot written all over him, doesn't he? I mean, the thing, when he did the Tom Kaine thing, you know, when I saw that, just because, shit, he's lived in New York, you know what I mean? And it's just so funny that he confused the Tim Kaine guy or whatever from Virginia with Tom Kaine, a Republican. And it's just, you know, what, he thought Hillary Clinton chose Tom Kaine? You know what I mean? It would be a ludicrous choice. I think the fucker's almost dead anyways, like 170. You know, I don't even think he's alive, for fuck's sake.
I don't think he planned to win. Like, Bernie didn't plan to win, but when he started to get going, he's like, yeah, we could do it. And he worked for that, whether he ever really thought it would pull off or not. He seemed to. Whereas Trump, no, it's actually, part of it is like the producers. He has to lose. He has to be able to lose, complain. I mean, he planned to lose in the primary, but get a big sale for another ghost-written book or something, or you know what I mean, from the popularity and the international.
Right, exactly. Just gets his name back in the paper.
Now
he's saying soft soaked a bunch of Christians who love wasting money on crap. So I'm sure they'll buy Trump shit.
He's got a big job to do with a lot of pressure and a lot of chance to be. But if he gets fired, then even though he'll have to be a loser one time, he doesn't have to paint it that way. He can paint it as the Republican Party turned against him and the press, and he can start a TV channel now that Roger Ailes is
I don't think
Fox.
I don't even think he has the money to do that. I think the guy is so full of shit. I mean,
well, but that's the thing about running for TV, is then you get the banks to pony up again, because the Trump name is worth something for 3 years that they can try to horn in on. Well, he really does understand media, obviously, and they make an even worse version of Fox News. But if it's not that, it's something like that. You know, it's like conspiracy theories. It's something shaped like that. He can't win. There's no winning for him by being
well, I'm
president.
just saying, I don't even think he has connections. I don't even think he knows people that are actually smart or intellectual. All right. I mean,
he can't pull off the presidency.
I don't even think he has something called a friend.
Well, and to bilk the government as president and get away with it, you have to understand the system really well. It has all these levers and stuff to go ahead and take money out. But you can't just be a crazy guy saying this shit on TV and get away with it. That's
my point is you can obviously get away with it, and
no, but I don't think he could. It takes.
I know, but the underlying point is you're seeing hope, and I'm not seeing too much hope in the fact that people are gravitating towards these simplistic answers.
Well, there's not that much hope, because Hillary's just the status quo. I mean, the best we get with her is like presidents, like it's always been, invade these places.
Well, I know. Well, I don't know. I don't know if she has that much personal ambition. Okay, to do this. You know, I don't know. Okay, frankly, what her personal ambition would be as president. So I don't know whether she would be as stupid as Obama in terms of playing this whole, you know, whatever Islamic Spring crap. But regardless, the one thing I do know, is she's not going to, as Trump has promised, she's not going to put another Scalia on the Supreme Court, and that's the thing that's important.
Well, and steady as she go, I've always been against that, except for when you have a Trump and you're like, well, there's another steady as the idiots go in this country and all over the world, and we got to remember it can get worse. I mean, these people get elected. You've seen it all around, or like Philippines, I guess, isn't that where the guy is? That's a good example of it. These kind of people do get elected, and porn stars and weird celebrities. So it's never a good sign. Never works out well.
Well, it's not that it can't work out well because, frankly, the politics is so stupid that an amateur can't do it much worse, frankly.
No, and a politician or a comedian, that can be great. Believe me, I'd vote for that. I mean, I think Al Franken's one of the better
Well,
ones we got now.
I think it was fairly disappointing.
But I'm talking about people that make Jesse Ventura look sane, do win national elections in this, well, the last century and are now, I mean, it happens and we're not immune from that. And Trump is that bad. And that is what causes chaos to break out. People think it's some sort of nefarious plan, but really it's usually incompetence and craziness and encouraging the schizophrenics to shoot each other.
Yeah,
And everybody
I'm
gets
just
caught
saying.
up in it.
I guess my objections to Trump are more, just basic. I mean, he has basically aligned himself with the right-wing Christians. I mean, he's almost as bad as like the cliche. What was that black guy that used to always run as a Republican? The religious
Alan
nut.
Keyes.
Yeah, Alan Keyes. He's Alan Keyes without any intelligence. I mean, he's completely sold out to the Bible thumpers. And so he's just as bad as Sarah Palin. I mean, he's just as bad as a person who believes in demons because he's basically made a contract. I mean, he's basically contracted, right? He can't really go back on his word now, but and look, his vice president candidate forces people to put tombstones up for aborted fetuses.
I think he's the kind of guy that he gets your contracting and doesn't pay you. I think he might think that he can do that and they vote for him and that the payment comes later and there's no real contract.
Well, I'm just saying, I think he's dumb, but I don't think he's that dumb. Okay, I think he's dumb. Well, I don't think he's dumb enough to think he can fuck the Christians without it totally getting slaughtered. Okay, you can't.
Well, I think literally
you can't make a deal. You can't make a deal with those Christian nuts. All right, somebody turns on them, they're really going to crucify you.
And not just politically, there can be unrest in this country. Has a big growing up of unrest, which is how it looks like in countries where fucking next thing you know, the Indonesian thugs are killing.
Well, I'm just saying he's made commitments that he can't not keep. That's all I'm saying. They're not going to be unkept.
But he can't keep all of them, and so the point is there's going to be unrest. To me, the point is that there's going to be unrest.
Well, I think there's going to be unrest just because I don't care who gets elected because we have no fundamental rational policy in place. So
unrest is the gentle word. I think there should be unrest in the sense that people are out there complaining, and if the Bernie brothers and Hillary wins and they give her a hard time everywhere she goes, fine. But I mean, no, this stuff where someone's socking someone in the face and it's being encouraged. Brown shirts. It's no longer Godwin's law when that is happening. That is the foreshadow.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying that the more dangerous element are the 1 million people with the 3 million guns. So 300 million.
Well, I think there's a lot of overlap there.
Well, that's what I just said. I said 1 million. I was exaggerating, but yes.
There's a lot of overlap with these same groups of people. The paranoids with a bunch of guns.
Well, I'm just saying that we know that they're hugely they have a huge propensity to be aligned with the fundamentalist Christian kookery.
Yeah.
I mean, you want to find a gun nut, probably find guns and Bibles next to each other in a lot of homes.
You know how the thing about the Air Force Officer Corps has been taken over, like with this huge number of dominionist, basically Hallelujah Days, a rapture type theology for years and years, like almost a conspiracy. And I don't think that's true of the other. I'm not a big fan of military culture, but it is true. They've been caught doing it in the Arizona or the Air Force School has been caught with things like that. And sometimes I think that is actually a group ready to. In other words, we have
it's idiocracy. You can draw a profile of what idiocracy looks like, and I'm just saying we're looking like it. And what part of it is going to be this fundamentalism, the simple ideas, these simple principles that have nothing to do with the real circumstance we're stuck in. God isn't going to save us. I'm
telling you, we need to split this country in two. Just say, okay, you were right, the South. You can leave. Our bad. Sorry about that. Here you go. Here's $1.
You're going to have to cut it in a lot more than two.
Here's your watch and your
wallet. You're going to have to cut it in a lot more than two because I'm not living in Bernie Sanders fucking, communist, fucktardia either.
Well, if you took the North, it would turn out, because you got Michigan, you got all these places, it would turn out like America more used to be a little bit. I don't think it would be very Bernie Sanders-y if you had, you'd have Obamas and Hillarys for years and years.
Well, I'm just saying that's not going to satisfy me either. So I'm just saying that
well,
you're going to have to. You're going to have to. I want. If we're going to balkanize, I want a lot of Balkan states. I don't want two Americas.
I think up to 5. Up to 5.
Well, whatever. It doesn't matter. I'm just saying that the fact that you have to resort to that would just mean you're doomed anyway, because then we were just going to piss each other off and fight, and so it's all over anyway. So I mean, there's no, there's no.
Well, the best solution would be stick with the American system and just loosen up the federal government in certain respects, but not others, so that we don't, like the president, maybe the president, like, how about this? Get rid of the stupid standing army. I just reread the Constitution. I printed it out. And, it talks about the militia a lot of places more than the Second Amendment. The militia is supposed to be only militaries if you get attacked. And then all the states vote. You couldn't send everybody into war. Every governor would have to send people to Iraq. Not likely to
exactly.
happen.
And that's just going to divide the country, because no one's going to want to play along, right? So you're not going to get anything done. So that's
no. I think you would. I think there'd be no problem having a regulated.
I think there'd be a huge problem. Everybody's going to just say, let somebody else do it. If they got a choice to say, let somebody else get drafted, they're going to let somebody else get drafted.
Well, I don't think we need overseas wars.
Well, I'm just saying you have to be ready for them. So there's not really an argument about it.
Why? Why do you have to be ready for a war that doesn't come to your own shore?
Well, because you have to be, in the sense that Adolf Hitler and all that kind of crap was a reality. And we live in a world where there's going to be lots of countries where somebody's going to take advantage, like
but
Kuwait.
People volunteer for wars like that.
Well, I'm just saying, I didn't say bring back the draft. I'm just making the argument that you need to still have a military. You need to pay a military, a standing army, to be ready to do shit.
Well, there's some of the militia is always standing at some point for the defense, and the offense is very just have Rumsfeld.
I think the word militia is just archaic nonsense. You have paid mercenary soldiers. You pay them, an income. It's not. We can't fight a war by walking 10 miles.
Well, no, militia is
war. I'm just saying it's just stupid. It's a technology thing. You got to spend money on the military. That's okay with me. It's having the wars not okay with me.
But I don't really get what you're talking about. I mean, saying militia just means that people will have other jobs and they get called up. It's like the Army Reserve idea.
Right. It's a totally ineffectual army. It's very expensive.
It's ineffectual for attacking other countries.
Out of it. Yeah, well, I'm just saying it's just no point in it. It's
very effectual in defense because it's already deployed.
Well, I'm just saying if you don't have a good military, then what happened in, like, say, with Milosevic wouldn't have been possible. So that successful incursion by us wouldn't have happened. And, there's lots of places where the military could have done good things instead of bad things. So I'm just arguing that I would just UNize the military and then have the UN military take care of Israel and all this other stuff, secure the border, take responsibility for incursions and all the rest of it.
I don't want a stupid civil war. I say it's either time to divorce or figure out a way to work it out. And I would take, I'm willing, and I never have been before until the last few years, like even all these abortion, whether you can duel, not slavery, not murder, but, to a certain degree, when you say people could duel in some state, it is like saying, well, okay, that doesn't count as murder. I mean, is it? I would be willing to do that, whatever it takes to get everybody off each other's throats like a bunch of whiny bitches.
Well, we need a fair system. Until you have a fair system, you're not going to have anything. So I'm saying,
but those guys don't want a fair system.
I know. That's why I'm just saying you have to impose it. So I don't think there's anything wrong with doing that. But they're not imposing fairness; they're imposing unfairness. They're telling people what they have to believe.
Well, you know what? You're right, because it's funny that I would just start saying we should split up, because in reality, we're poised to win. Like, not enough in our lifetime that you and I would say, yeah, we won. But it's true. A lot of those bigotries are dying away. Whatever worries you have about, immigration is a problem. It's not the same version they had of it 70 years ago, and we could figure out that compared to the problem we had in the past. So they are going away, and we can, I mean, in another 30 years, I don't think there's a Trump's going to have any chance, because the way he's focusing the demographic that are voting for him, it's not, it's true what they're saying about that's going away. There'll be other hate mongers, but it's not going to be with this Nixon to Reagan to Trump to Gingrich style. It's time's running out.
I don't know. I think it's gotten more divisive, frankly. So before, whether it was where it was like a 60% majority against the 20% minorities, it's now like a 30% majority against a bunch of 5% minorities, and it's just a very, we really have just there's just no, ironically, all these people who are for all this, they love this open culture crap. They have no respect for preserving culture. So they like mixing cultures, but they don't like preserving culture.
I like preserving
somehow
culture.
Well, I'm just saying that obviously importing a bunch of religious kooks from all over the world is not preserving our culture. It's destroying our culture. It's going to annihilate. That's not how
I see refugees. I see that they're leaving those governments because they don't like things run that way.
That's fine. You can see it that way. I'm just saying I think it's perfectly rational for somebody to see it quite obviously quite different, and they see that everything's written in a different language in a country that had a cultural meme where you could speak English, and now you can't anymore. It's not good enough.
Well, that's the sense in which I'm not a typical liberal in my knee-jerk things. Like, I do believe people should learn English and should have to go to English class until they learn it. And if they never learn it,
you believe that they should. You believe we should have the right to die.
No, that we should make
things
them.
that we don't
that we should
have.
make them.
And I'm just saying that those things should exist before. This is, again, we're back to this build the nest before you lay the eggs argument. I think you have to demonstrate that there's some hope you're going to build the nest before you justify laying the eggs. And we keep laying the eggs before we do the rules that say this is how you're going to have to behave. So again, I would say I was for open borders, as long as these nest things are going to be met.
I respect that position. I respect that position because that's true. For example, there is a real issue of infiltration in the case of when 1 million come in and ISIS is like, hey, this will be an infiltrate. There is issues. But also, even more importantly, like you're saying, us other things, teach them English or whatever there is about jobs, or somehow integrate. You don't have to give up your food. In fact, open a restaurant with it. But you need to learn some English.
Well, and you got to have respect for the Constitution. If you don't believe in secular government and you don't believe in democracy and you don't believe women should vote, then we're not the country for you.
Well,
those principles we're not going to compromise on. So, and we are not interested in anybody making trouble. So if all you're going to do is make trouble, get the fuck out of here.
Yeah, you do have to do an oath to the Constitution. I entirely agree with that as well. And it's a really pretty good document. I was just rereading it, though it is funny the things that have changed, and the things that are signed to kind of quaint, like, and by 1801 we're going to do it a different way or whatever.
Yeah, well, you called yourself a Second Amendment liberal, and I just found that so disgusting.
I love guns.
I'm just saying,
bang,
this is just such bullshit. Because if you read the Second Amendment, they just typed all those extra. They wasted feather ink writing all those extra words for absolutely no reason. So yeah, the whole preamble was just there because they felt like, let's waste some of this expensive parchment and just write a bunch of crap.
I'm not a Second Amendment conservative that ignores everything in that amendment.
Well, you're basically, when you say I'm a Second Amendment, you're just basically saying that you believe there's some absolute right to own handguns.
No, that's not true. I believe it's related to the fact that it's cheaper and safer ultimately.
I'm not saying there's any point. Well, that militia thing is just idiotic.
It's right in the Second Amendment.
I'm just sorry. Yeah, I know. We don't live in a place where people have private property and do all this stuff and hunt and all this other kind of crap.
That's not what militia's about.
It is. It is about. It's a fucking posse.
No.
That's all the militia is a posse. It's an unofficial police force.
Nope.
Yes.
Nope.
Well, you go ahead. Tell me the difference. Tell me the difference between a posse and a militia.
It's like running a militia is like having a military that operates like a volunteer fire department, where people are on the ready, they're on duty, but if there's no fire, they go do their own business.
Right. Or if they want to make a fire, okay, like they did here, they started fires just to be useful. All right. Just so they could shoot their guns, so to speak. So yeah, same difference. I don't want amateurs doing the most important jobs in the world is bullshit. Okay, cops should be the most accountable motherfuckers in the country. They should go for the longest prison terms for any violation of the law. And the military should be held to the same standard. They should be professionals. If they can't be professionals, they shouldn't have the job. Militia is just bullshit.
It's like the Army Reserve or some National Guard. How it
again, totally dysfunctional.
Where they are highly trained.
They suck. They're the ones that made a mess over when a fucking hurricane hit, and they were fucking useless. They were absolutely useless.
Well, that wasn't their fault, and it's also
I think it is their fault. I think they don't know what the fuck they're doing. Okay, they're collecting a paycheck. They really don't want the job seriously. They're all overweight.
Well, yeah, those are some of the problems you're talking about things being badly operated. But
Well, I'm just saying, multitasking is something you do when absolutely necessary. It's not something you do on purpose. So I'm just saying, you don't have people that have different jobs. They have a job. They should be professional at their job.
It's just, imagine, don't you think there's some way to get at that money we spend on defense, and if we have enough money for everything?
We don't need to spend as much. I totally agree with cutting the military budget. Okay, I mean, I don't think we do need as many people as we have in North Korea, and we don't need a lot of the other crap going on. We don't need a lot of the hardware. So yeah, I could cut it in half, no problem, and certainly cut the physical force and down to 1 million instead of 2 million. So I got no problem with that.
That would have a similar effect, because you're just bringing troops home.
I'm certainly not going to be interested in having reckless wars, but I'm just saying, I think there's a lot to be done in Africa. There's places where we fucking should be, because they don't need much military to make for a civilized life, and nobody's doing anything without a vested interest, and that to me is kind of immoral, and that's my opinion. It's immoral for us to do nothing. We're the richest fucking country in the world, and for us to just sit back and let countries slaughter each other, I think would be unethical.
I think also we could use, in the same light, use the military transition some of its roles so that it is part of its mission of, like, when they had the tsunami, and I think there was an aircraft carrier, maybe it was something smaller, that went over there, and they've got like all this power, so they can plug in and power up a city, start the factories and the sawmills again, that kind of stuff. Because that's also where there's unrest. If you're worried about people, attacks, it could be.
Well, that's why I would make it. That's why I would make it mostly a UN force. You're trained to be part of an international. You're not just wearing USA badges. You're wearing a badge as a court official
like the
of
Federation.
Planet Earth. Yeah, whatever. Yes, a member of the whatever stupid name you want to give it, but yeah, exactly.
Everybody wears their own traditional uniform. It's like, if we're gonna wear uniforms, let's all be something different.
Well, I'm just saying, I think you can maintain, your identity as a nation and still be for a civilized world, and be that as being the agenda, and just have that as the focus. The focus isn't the United States flag. The focus is fixing problems.
Yeah. Hey, I'm going to take a break. And if you're talking science when I get back, I'll just listen for a while and let you get into the... but I'll probably be back, but I have other things to do and stuff too. But I'll at least be back and listen. If you want to talk about science, well, maybe I'll say something, maybe not.
Yeah.
But I'm on a low cigarette thing because I'm not supposed to have any. So it's over now. I'm going to smoke that cigarette.
Yeah.
And get a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
My mind getting the cup of coffee is what I've been waiting for. I'm like, I should take a break and get a cup. But I'm going to stand up, and that's a trigger.
Everything's a trigger for me.
Standing up.
I breathe a little too heavy. That's a trigger for me. I need a cigarette. I just took a deep breath.
Yeah, exactly. I know, and that was a good breath. My breathing isn't as bad as I thought it was getting. I can obviously have a cigarette.
Yeah, I could have two. So anyway, yes. All right. So back to the agenda of the room, which isn't supposed to be political science. It's supposed to be real science. Science that scientists do. Unfortunately, idiots do political science. So yes, much of it is just a pile of crap. So, yeah, well, volunteer firemen are not brilliant. So yeah, there's a Trent says firemen watch fires burn instead of putting them out. I saw that in this town, actually. Volunteers just ain't gonna, they're either stupid and do stupid things and you have to rescue them, or they really don't want to be heroes. And, I might get, there's smoke. I don't want to, it's hot in there. I don't want to go in there. It's hot. But yeah, that's not brilliant. They just want to, pretend to be vital human beings doing their manly thing. I'm fighting the fire. See, I'm standing here watching it. Yes, it's the way you fight a fire. You humiliate it and insult it until it runs away. But anyway, so yeah, back to the particle wave crapola, which I really want to get to eventually, somehow. So anyway, and thinking about the magnets thing, so the Ken guy, he keeps trying to, I can't even, well, I'll play some of his video. But the idea that, he just doesn't go with this idea that, a magnet, he'll talk about how you break a magnet and it makes a bunch of little magnets. Yeah, well, that's because it's an atomic filter. It's not a filter in a big way. And the Earth is gravitational, has mass, and all the little atoms make the mass. The mass isn't the Earth. The mass is just a collection of the little bits. And that's where it gets its mass from. And that's where it gets its whatever function it has, is an expression of what the little bits are doing. And now that often isn't always true. Even us, you could argue that we're not just our cells expressing something. It's not an expression of some fundamental quality in the cells. The computer's memory chips or something, they're not really doing anything fundamental to the process that the computer's doing. There's no component in the piece of silicon that has anything to do with the attribute of logic, binary math, any of that. So anyway, no point in confusing subjects. I'm not trying to say that all attributes are elemental, because they're not. But physics is elemental. That's the important thing I'm trying to get to. So it's just trying to figure out the filtering, how the filter is made is the thing I'm contemplating. And so the key ingredients of these filters, and by filter, it's like I said, with magnetism, it's made obvious. Okay, so a rule of magnets, I would say, is that the two poles it's really just two magnets. It's really two things, two filters. One filtered opposite the way the other one is filtered. And the two of them are functioning as if independent in a way. So you could argue that if this thing was falling, and it was falling in the proximity, say another magnet was falling in the proximity of this magnet, the trick is that it's always going to want, the south part is always going to be attracting, in the sense that it's always going to be there's going to be an absence of pressure, and so the external pressure will push them together. And the common filters are doing exactly the opposite. And it's affecting each magnet as it falls. So if it has a north-south polarity and this has the north face here, what's going to happen is this thing is going to tilt to the south. So it's always going to, as it's falling, the south is always going to be rejected, and the other side is going to be attractive. And so it's always going to be orienting itself as if the south was trying to get away, but it can't. It's connected to the north, so it can't escape. So I mean, my point is they're sort of behaving as independent things, yeah, but they're obviously physically connected, so they can't just split apart because of those physical connections. So there's more than one element of agency. No, it's not a good word. There's competing forces, but the key thing is that the structure is just that structure. So cutting a magnet just really means it's just making a smaller magnet. I mean, the structure is internal, and nothing substantial has to change in the magnet. Now, you can take a magnet and put it on another magnet and change its polarity, in the sense that you can get things to flip, the domains to flip 180 degrees, but they don't flip some other angle. They just flip exactly 180 degrees. So you can, but that's like electricity. You can switch the polarity of electricity, and you can switch the polarity of a magnet, but you can't do something in between. I mean, you either create something that's blue-red in its filter, or red-blue, but there's no other kind of filter. And in magnetism and electricity, that's the way it is. It's a filter that absorbs, reflects, which is absorption. You know, I know that doesn't sound right, but it is. And then there's this when it passes through, and polarization is dictating how much you're going to be impacted, based on the fact that if you have a polarizing filter that is more likely to reflect more of the stuff coming at you, because it's of a similar polarization to the stuff coming at you, then you're going to gain more acceleration from that external force. By reflecting the energy in some other manner. So it's always this conservation thing. And, you know, that just makes the whole, I think, this defeats the whole wave concept of anything, is conservation, is that everything is quantizable. And there just isn't any, fundamentally, anything that could surprise you if you really did know what was going on. So anyway, the Ken guy, you know, let's see, awesome, DS is live, day completes, faith in humanity restored, cats and dogs love each other, good times, well, whatever, that's not terribly productive as a comment. Kind of a waste of my time even reading it. But anyway, thank you for the jabber. All right, so I mean, this is the tricky part, though. Again, it's just, why does force affect force differently when force is in the form of matter? And so that, I think, comes down to the spin concept, and this the idea that when captured in positions, which, you know, magnets can do. You can arrange a bunch of magnets where none of the magnets will move, because they all have a balanced force. So I was playing with this magnet today and just dropping a little piece, and then I'd have these two magnets just opposed in different positions, and the piece would fly either to this one or this one, but sometimes it go right between the two and go backwards, hit my hand, fly back to this magnet. I mean, you know, its momentum, physical momentum, would be strong enough where it just couldn't hit either one, and it went somewhere else. and you know, making it just kind of obvious that there's not a you know, that it's a crude force that's pushing these things together, and that it's a balancing force in the sense that they do the field, the biggest field, is the only field that matters in a sense. Yeah, that's not exactly the way I say it. All right, so the thing about this, see, the problem is that, yeah, it'd be really nice if I could just keep this being a kinetic universe and just leave it at that. Just say, look, we get the idea. Stuff is pushing the Earth, you know, from all directions. Little bits are going through the Earth, and as they go through the Earth, they accelerate the little bits. And since the Earth has got a complete circumference, it's balanced on all sides. The end result is you get a spherical object. And all the bits seem to be heading for the center. And that's what you're always going to get in any kind of particle field of completely balanced pressure. And so if you just realize that this balanced pressure force is all straight line force, then you get the idea that this is going to be able to shadow. So you create shadows because it's all straight line force. But the thing is that forces, like magnetism, is not going to affect light. You know, light isn't going to bend electricity. I mean, the forces, none of the things I'll call light a force. It's not anything else. And it's like magnetism and like gravity. They're all in the same. All the things moving the speed of light are really just forces. And the forces are made out of the simplest bit in the universe, the quanta, the fish. And then when the fish are in a school, that's when things get funky, because that's when force comes in from one side of the school and it leaves in some other direction. The obvious reflection would be the fish goes in, another fish goes out in the opposite direction, which is the reflection. But what that means is the school gave away a fish going that way, for a fish going that way, which means the school will now be moving that way. So in a sense, it absorbed the velocity of the fish by giving the opposite velocity to the field. But it could also do the same thing by giving that opposite velocity in some tangential direction, as long as it adds up to the same thing, which is fish. So when you accelerate an electron, when you accelerate a charge, so we'll just use electrons because it's simpler, that's when you create this perpendicular release of fish. Yeah. Now the question is it a release of fish? I mean, are these actual fish that it's losing, or are these fish that are just being filtered and come out polarized? And the truth is that the answer is like both. The thing goes in, something goes in of one polarization and something goes out of another polarization. So what you're really exchanging is the polarization. So interactions with matter are exchanges of polarization, of polarized force, well, I'll just say polarization for now. So the important feature isn't so much about which direction the thing left in. The important feature is what was the polarization of the thing that went in versus the thing that went out. The thing kept and the thing released. And its real velocity matters. So but its real velocity can only be kept if its real velocity is in a polarization consistent with what the filter is creating. So the filter, the piece of matter, is really just a collection of polarization. So that's probably a key principle. Matter is a collection of polarization, of polarized, of, let's see, of polarized bits, quanta, or fish. So it'll only accept velocity from a fish with polarization it can absorb. It's consistent with the polarization of the school. So the school of fish, in a sense, can only accept a fish coming in where it won't go through it, just come out the other end, in a sense, because come out the forward end just shoots out a fish. For that not to happen, the fish has to have the polarization of the rest of the school, or at least a third of the school, or however the mechanism is of the structure. I'm tending to think electrons are like galaxies, that they're flat, but that's just a tend to think thing. I have to think on that some more. I think the atomic world is flat structures more than spherical ones. And that might be a curious fact that at the big universe it goes flat, and at the very small universe it's flat, and it's in this in-between universe you get the round shit. So, and there's probably a logical reason for it to be that way. Well, that's kind of complimentary. I like to see you do videos on astronomy too. Well, I have done videos on astronomy. I just keep repeating some of the videos on astronomy where I keep pointing out the Hubble telescope can look, it doesn't have to worry about atmospheric scatter, so it can look at the field of stars around the sun in broad daylight. It can look right next to the sun without the sunlight damaging or hurting its field of view. And so it could find solar lensing, and it has it, obviously. I've certainly pointed out how there's so much gravity in the universe, and all of those sources of gravity, all of those heavy gravitational fields aren't lensing, and they should be, theoretically. If the sun can lens, then those heavier gravitational fields should be significantly lensing, and there's no evidence that they are. So anyway, all right, so it's a polarized filter. So what's happening, let's say, in the case of electricity or magnetism, you move the field by moving the object. Okay, well, yeah, the magnet thing is just, yeah, I really have to come up with to do visuals in some kind of constructive way. So this is a little thing on magnets. I'll just draw a little picture of a magnet and get some idea of it. That there's a big difference between the distances you're away from a magnet. So if I have two magnets, these are just positions. So it's position A for this little one, and position B is closer. And the point would be is that these are filters. So you could think of these lines going vertical here and horizontal here. So they're two opposite filters, the north side and the south side. And what's really happening is the field energy to hit this thing, it's going through. So the only lines we're counting now are the lines that actually go through the material. So I'll draw those. And, you know, it'd be better if I could do them in two colors, I suppose. Maybe I'll do solid lines and then dotted lines. But the idea is that the only stuff that matters is the stuff that goes through the filter. And you can sort of see, well, I didn't do dotted lines, but it doesn't really matter. I think it'll still be visible enough. That the thickness of the material it's going through. So you can kind of see, like, when the thing is close, the lines that would go through, like the thickest part of the magnet are longer than the ones that when you get further away. So as you get further away, not only are you doing that inverse square thing where you're getting further away from the amount of stuff that will actually be able to hit you, the amount of fish, because the fish are diverging. But so that's how you have to sort of think about it in this kind of weird way, is you have to think about it both as this thing producing a field that spreads out this way, but also recognize that the only part of the field that matters is the part that'll actually intersect with this object. So from its perspective, the field is always straight lines coming out. And what's the total time that the lines were going through the filter? And so you can just see, though, that those arcs get much wider for the thing further away. So it's that opposite of the gravity thing. It's the inverse square thing. So now there's less lines for this thing than there is for this thing. So and the more important thing is this outside part, that the outside becomes more and more significant in terms of its pull the closer you get. So as the thing is dropping, it's going to tend to drift towards the outside, just because the repulsion on its south side is going to keep getting stronger. And this thing is being induced to be a magnet. So if this isn't a magnet to start with, then it gets even more complicated, because the magnetism is induced as it gets closer to the magnet. And so the speed with which it's dropping can be faster than the induction rate. And so that's why non-magnetic material, when you drop them on the center of a magnet, they might have a tendency not to hit the center of the magnet. It's because they're inducing their magnetism as they're falling. And so the negative force, the thing pulling the south thing away from the center, is stronger, let's say, than the repulsion is stronger than the attractive element, something like that. But I mean, that's, I don't want to get into a complex argument, but I mean, there's lots of these little phenomenons that you can just figure out that, there's a big difference, that when you do change distances, that you get a big difference in how things will be affected. And, and part of that's that alignment thing, that the alignment itself has a consequence. There's a Piro again.
Yeah, and I gotta go. I just noticed how late it is. But I did want to, that's an interesting thing you were just saying there as that's why water is such an interesting material, because it's overall, it seems all neutral. But when things are floating in it on the molecular level, all this magnetic is induced. Water molecules will spin around, and suddenly there's a wall of the mouse ear electrons, and you've got a negative to positive binding. So that's why it dissolves everything and all this other weird shit. It is very interesting. I had never thought about that, actually. But of course, I don't know if you read that or you were saying you deduced it, but it is true that you have things like magnetic deflection of a neutral object, because as it approaches the magnet, the electrons a lot of them get sloshed over to that side, and it becomes negative on that side.
Yeah,
so you would have effects from that. Yeah, various effects.
Yeah, so just keep changing the charge field, so to speak, and it happens.
It's probably a good idea. If I see your rooms, I'll come in and I'll just keep programming. That way, I can listen longer and see all the the interesting aspects. I think last time we talked about, I did get a lot more where you're going with it. So, but okay, I'll talk to you later. Take it easy.
Okay.
All right. Cheers.
Right. Yeah. So where was I again? Yes. So anyway, So, well, like I said, I'll play a little of the apocalypsis guy just because it's, you know, it's just, to me, it's, so I'm trying to understand what he's arguing. And it's this whole Tesla thing, and it's this whole electric universe thing. I think these are all common or associated theories anyway. And so it's doing what I disagree with to the extreme, in the sense that it's not even just quantum mechanics where they do wave particle duality. It's completely wave everything. Everything's waves. Everything's a vibration of some kind traveling through ether of some kind. And there's lots of reasons, I mean, rational reasons why in the past they deduced that can't be the explanation because of the friction problem. And you know, it's a valid argument to make. And again, it was an argument that I had to deal with when I first started playing with particle gravity, because then I was informed that this is the Lesage theory, and that it was debunked because there's no way to have these interactions without creating a heat problem and a velocity degrading problem, in the sense that when you have velocity, you'll be moving into the field twice as fast or 3 times faster, and you're going to have more impact with stuff in front of you than behind you, obviously. And so that's when I came up with the kinetic explanation, where in kinetics it doesn't matter. You know, the kinetic interactions are the most catastrophic are the least impactful. The head-on collision with the two kinetic balls being the example, where the two universes, where the two hit each other and bounce off of each other, and where two miss each other, those two universes you can't tell the difference between. If you didn't hear the balls hit each other, you know, and if you didn't know that, if you couldn't see dimensionally they were on the same plane, you couldn't tell the difference between the world where they missed each other and then the world where they catastrophically collided. And so once you add something like that to the mechanism, then you can solve a lot of the problems with conservation rules. And so anyway, well, so Ken doesn't deal with any conservation issues, and neither did Tesla. And you know, and there is so much overstatement connected with those theories that Ken should at least be a little more humble, in the sense that most of his believers believe in perpetual energy. They believe Tesla was onto something, that Tesla did something. I mean, beyond what he did early in his career, when he did, you know, when he created the phased motor, you know, the added, you know, 2 or 3 times as much field energy to the function of an AC motor. A good improvement. But yeah, that was his one-hit wonder, and the rest of what he was doing was theoretically and principally kind of stupid, in the sense that he was basically thinking he could take stuff and move it through the ether without having to move it through the matter that was in the ether, you know, the atmosphere. I mean, yeah. Let's see. Some scientists reckon particles never hit each other, but they do all the time at CERN. Well, anyway, I'm not going to talk about the CERN's, number one, not using particles per se. It's throwing schools of fish at schools of fish, which is a little bit different. And I mean, wait, I'm just arguing that if you want to think that this is a way that you find out what something is made out of, I take 2 Volkswagens and I crash them into each other at 50 miles an hour, and I'm going to get the parts flying off are going to be real parts of Volkswagens. I would argue that no, logically you can understand that the stuff that flies off that lasts less than a millisecond probably isn't an atomic part. It's a part of a part. Okay, it's a broken piece. And the reason why it's consumed is because the other bits want the energy. I mean, the matter absorbs energy when it can, but they're caught in that middle stage. They're neither sustainable matter nor are they free energy. And so in that condition, it's a wobbling piece of crap, and a wobbling piece of crap in our solar system will likely get consumed by something eventually. That's why the solar system is so empty. I mean, except for the garbage we put around the Earth, there's really such a tiny amount of matter in the solar system, loose matter. Very, very, very tiny. So obviously, in my opinion, the bits that CERN creates get absorbed by something, because that's what's going to happen. They're going to get caught in a field, and the field is going to consume them, pull them in to an atom. The energy is going to get absorbed by something. So anyway, but I'm saying I don't think it's the way to figure out how Volkswagens are made is to smash Volkswagens into Volkswagens. So I think theoretical physics has a lot more to say about the truth, modeling how the Volkswagens work, than these idiots crashing Volkswagens. So I don't think particle accelerators have advanced our knowledge at all, frankly. They generally look for what they're looking for. They generally just keep drawing a picture and say, what's the next thing we need in our picture to make it make sense? And then they go find it. They smash enough Volkswagens together until finally a piece flies off that looks like the piece they drew. And it's not much better than that. Yeah, well, I heard they can create black holes. It just doesn't mean anything. I mean, a black hole that lasts a millisecond, I don't think that's really a black hole then. Work at CERN? You work at CERN? Well, maybe you can talk a physicist into showing up someday. Yeah, well, anyway, it is a lot of money. I just think that, yeah, it would have been money better spent in other ways of approaching the problem. I'm sure there's other experiments that could be done. Lots of other experiments that need to be done. But whatever, it doesn't, like I said, the standard model is not going anywhere because it's so wrongly premised, in my opinion. Yeah, but the idea of, I think the real key is, again, is this particle concept is so broken. It started off badly, because we're doing it with these crude instruments. I mean, in the past, a particle was like a cannonball, and now particles have gotten smaller and smaller. But we just misappropriated this word, and so now things like an electron that have complex features, they're called particles, and protons, neutrons, and they really can't sensibly be thought of that way. They have to be thought of more like atoms. They have to be thought of things that have an internal structure, and that's why they do something more complicated than just go in a straight line at the speed of light. And so I think it's I think it's a fundamental problem in the conversation is, and I still do it, so I'm still guilty of it. It's just hard to break this bad habit. And then, a second huge flaw was when Einstein coined the phrase photon, and so you had this idea of a ton, a thing. But the problem is that his description of light, he was thinking of the ton as having the wavelength, the frequency, that the ton was the entire hunk. So the entire length of the frequency would be the ton. And the truth is that the tonness, the frequency, is just the distance between the cannonballs, or the bullets, however you want to describe it. And so to have a photon, you automatically have to have two cannonballs. You have to have two tons to have a photon, at least two. You could have three, you could have five, you can have seven. I don't know how many, I don't know what the longest stream of perfectly coherent light ever produced in the universe was. But I imagine, because it has to be produced by one electron, the idea is that one electron is producing one ray of light. And so this, again, where this gets complicated, because people are thinking of beams and different ways light is transmitted. But what it's transmitted, it's how it's transmitted. It's transmitted by an electron, and the electron has to fire these tons. And how fast it fires them will decide whether it's blue or red light, or some other kind of radiation. And the number of them will dictate the intensity of that ray of light. And the number of them will be dictated by the distance, the wavelength, the frequency. So the longer frequency radiation just can't be as intense as the shorter frequency radiation, because there can't be as many tons in it. There's fewer cannonballs. Obviously, if I fire cannonballs every second, or I fire cannonballs every minute, it's going to make a big difference, if you're on the receiving end of the cannonballs. So that's these little fundamental breaks in the conceptual language. Yeah, that's kind of a good term, conceptual language. Yeah, I like that. Breaks in. Which just kind of makes the conversation, it tends to force incoherent, I think logically wrong or incorrect interpretations of reality, just because the language is effectively broken. And if they had started off understanding the nature of frequency as being something like fired from a gun, a machine gun, it would have been a different science than this idea of wave perturbations and such, perturbations, whatever Ken says. So anyway, I keep saying I'm going to play some of his video, but I mean, you just can't. So his language is just so obtuse, and you just can't get anything out of it. I can't get anything. I can't get anything called the mental picture. He'll talk about it. He'll say the thing, and I'm like, well, what did you just say? What does this mean? It has to have a constituent. Even if you have an ether that's being vibrated, you still have to follow these conservation rules. So you still have to explain how the wave is caused, and where the mechanism that caused it came from. And so when he talks about magnetism, it's almost like he's saying it doesn't need a mechanism, and nothing has to come in. See, because the dead ether isn't going to create the source of energy. So the fundamental difference is with an active ether, which I'm arguing for something you might call an active ether, in the sense that I'm saying there's fish in the ocean, loose fish. And those loose fish, just by the nature of their vectors, at every location in space, there's a bunch of fish heading for that one particular location on a straight line. So all the loose fish only run in straight lines. And so from any one location, you could just say there's a bunch of fish heading right for that location. And that's the pressure. And that's the place where you get the energy for magnetism and electricity and all these things. A magnet isn't doing anything. The gravity going through it is being converted into polarized gravity. And that's doing what the magnet is doing. So it's the gravity being exposed, seen in a new way, expressed in a new way, that's making it significant, because now it's like, it's like the jail bar argument. You're throwing frisbees, and if the jail bars are all willy-nilly, none of the frisbees will get through. But if you take away all the horizontal ones, right? So if you make a grid out of the jail bars, well, then nothing can get through. But if I move the bars that are going horizontal, and turn them into vertical bars, then you can see that if I throw the Frisbee on its edge, a lot of the Frisbees will get through. And that's sort of the argument. It's fundamentally the argument. But the mechanism is the Frisbees. The source of the energy is the Frisbees, not the medium you're throwing them through. So again, if you're going to have an ether, you'd have to explain why the ether is moving, because that's the only way you can create the source of the apparent energy produced by a magnet. The magnet isn't producing any. It's not producing anything new. It's not using up anything inside of it. Like it's like radioactive and it's expelling a bunch of radioactive stuff or something. There's no energy in the magnet. The only thing that's making this apparent, giving it this apparent power, is the fact that it's converting gravity into it's just converting it into an effective force. So it's for the exchange of making one kind of polarization invisible, it doubles the strength of another polarization in terms of its effect. So it's still gravitationally neutral, but to an object that has the same polarized filter, the filters will see the effect of gravity either doubled or erased entirely. Okay. So anyway, so it's a field argument. So if you're going to argue for ether, you have to explain why you have to make the ether vibrate. You have to give the ether some way to generate momentum, acceleration. And if you don't, you have a conservation of energy problem, because you don't have a source for the energy, the thing that's pushing these two things together. Without it, if you don't say gravity did that, you got nothing. He inverts it and says that gravity is magnetism, but he's not inverting it in some way where, oh yes, well, we perfectly understand the magnetism, so now we can say it's gravity. If I did that without telling you that I think gravity is a particle field, then I'd be doing the same thing as just reverse it, just saying, a magnetism is gravity, but I don't give you an explanation for the force of gravity. I still don't explain to you why gravity moves things, changes their acceleration. Then I haven't done anything, right? I've provided I haven't illustrated or made anything visible. So anyway, I'll play a little bit of his video, hopefully. So he says something like, once we know these fundamental principles
and work and think, and by think I mean that term loosely.
By think, he says he uses that term loosely. So he's very arrogant in this whole conversation. He even made a couple of videos where we're talking like we're not made to see it, we can't see it, and only his superior mind can see it, because he's got a really brilliant mind. So he can see it, but most humans won't ever be able to see it, because it's the special knowledge that only the special people can see, because our brains aren't, whatever, on crack. This really is kind of lame.
Think the way Mother Nature thinks and comprehend the nature of polarity, the division between the plenum, an old word that people don't use anymore, between antinomies. It's a big term that the Greeks would talk about in great length. The aristos dagas. Now, I'm always left.
Yeah, that doesn't do me much good. The blanks, the potentities, and the arities, and whatever. I mean, so far, what do I do with that mentally? Can't do a damn thing with it. Doesn't give me a model, a map, a way of understanding, nothing. Yes, just nothing. Nothing useful so far.
Every time, of course, I've got hundreds of videos on magnetism and a popular book on magnetism for free download. When someone will leave me a comment saying, oh, well, magnets are in everything, cell phones and everything we use on a daily basis. Of course we know how magnetism works. And I always chuckle, kind of in a half crazy.
Well, anyway, yeah, obviously the standard explanation isn't much of an explanation. That's the whole point. They haven't explained it. They haven't unified the forces. And that's the whole point I'm making in this argument, is that if they would have got gravity right, then they could get magnetism right. They could have gotten time dilation right. They could have got velocity and inertia right. All of those things are based on understanding where the original source of the energy came from or is. And that's in the fact that photons move the speed of light. And that if you just realize that the photons around you, the visible light that you see, is just gravity labeled with a frequency. And that most of the stuff around you right now, most of the photons, the tons, most, like a billion to one, a trillion to one. So for every photon hitting you, there's a trillion gravitons hitting you. Once you understand that that's the real mechanism, that photons are only a tiny piece of the density of things moving the speed of light, and that they're just labeled. There's still gravity. They're just gravity labeled with a polarization and a frequency. So it's each ray of light has the same polarization. The cannonballs are all, if the cannonballs were shaped like a frisbee, the frisbees, the cannonballs are all flying in the same alignment, and they're at a specific distance between each other. That's a photon. And gravity is stuff coming at you at all different polarizations and at all kinds of frequencies, all kinds of distances between events. No regularity regarding polarization or frequency. That might be the right way to say it. No regularity regarding polarization or frequency. That's what gravity is. Okay. So it's light with no regularity. It's tons. Quantons. Anyway. So, all right, so back to the underlying challenge, which is, okay, so when this field of stuff is, we can, like I said, I think I can make an argument that you could really understand about the idea of the filter. Once the filter is created, how it ends up creating more filter because it's filtering, right? So the filter creates more filters. That could sort of be understood. But explaining how that first filter gets created is the tricky part. And, I haven't gotten there yet. But that's a challenge, like I said, that conventional theories haven't touched either. They don't give you anything. They don't give you a rational model of the moving parts within an atom. Just a hodgepodge of what will happen if they do something. They can tell you what will happen if they do something, but they can't tell you why it'll happen. Okay, so yeah, so we'll play a little more of his video. Yeah.
You chuckle, and I always direct those people to any of the world's largest manufacturers of permanent magnets, and a lot of them have FAQ pages, frequently asked questions. I say, go over to the people that are spitting out thousands of tons of industrial grade high-tech magnets and take a look at their fact page. You'll see on there a lot of information, and then someone will ask a question on their fact page. Well, how do magnets actually work? And the answer is invariably always something very simple to this effect. We really don't know how magnetism works.
Yeah, well, it's not really the source to go to, right? Because you can bake a cake doesn't mean you know the atomic weight or the molecular formula for the oil or the flour or anything else you put in the cake. So that's kind of a silly expectation. But anyway, yeah, I just I don't know if I really have a passion to just inch through his video. I mean, I thought there was more where he gets to these. There's the language he uses. It's just so useless.
That amazes so many people. We're brought up with our iPhones and our iPads and our computers and all the wonderful technology or cameras, and we think we are so smart. Well, there's a huge difference between technological advancement and wisdom, true comprehension. It's the same difference between descriptions and explanations. I can make a description of something incredibly complicated.
Descriptions and explanations. Well, a good description is an explanation, so I think there, solve that problem. Yeah, so I mean, but the key is that you can't describe it in some simple way, because you do have to go back to its atomic function. So it's always going to be nuclear physics. I mean, you just really can't escape that it's going to have a certain level of complexity to be able to describe how a magnet works. It's not going to be a simple thing. Simple beyond the fact that you can simplify it. You can analogize it to something. I can analogize the school as a fish, or I can analogize it to jail bars. Let's see, what else? But yeah, it's hard to, there's nothing else you can explicitly compare it to and say, look, magnets are alike, because they're not really like anything else.
As seen in nature. But that doesn't mean my explanation for it or my comprehension of what it is, for one, or number two, how the hell it works, is accurate or even close. Let's take a look at something really simple, and it's called a block wall or domain wall, and I'll show it to you here in an example. Okay, here's a quote-unquote magnet with a supposed polarity, north and south. A magnet actually doesn't have poles, it has the inverse of counter space.
Okay, it has the inverse of counter space. So he's saying that the distinction between the north and south, these aren't poles of some kind, that they're, what do you call it, something in counter space. How does that help? They're clearly two different things. The stuff at this end is doing something different than the stuff at this end. So this half of the magnet's doing something different than this half of the magnet. The end result, the end product. And it's most significantly different going through the magnet. Okay, from its north side to its south side. That seems the orientation of the filter. The filter has an orientation. If I turn it this way, it still has the same properties as it does this way. So it's something in the structure of the material itself that's identifiable, and there's a line that demarks the difference between, now you're heading into stuff that's mostly this, north, and you're down here heading into stuff that's mostly south, that way. I mean, it doesn't have to be pure south, but I mean, it's clearly a different filter.
Now this little crazy region right here is called the block wall or domain wall. Okay, well that's a nice lovely description. Okay, so let's get into a real physis in the ancient Greek, meaning nature. How nature works, how Mother Nature works. She works off simplex pressure mediation. Let's use some magnetic.
All right, simplex pressure mediation. Now I like the sound of that, but again, you can't do that with a stagnant dead ether. So if you're going to say that ether is under pressure, then you have to say that. You have to say the ether provides pressure, and the ether is congested, and the ether wants to go into things. It wants to permeate them in some way. Then it's an active ether. It's not a Tesla ether. Where was I? Oh, yeah. Sorry. I mean, I would like to increase the volume, but I'm too lazy. I mean, I have to load the. I have to. Well, I'll just do it. I just have to put the other computer on for a moment and find the other mouse and slide the volume up and click.
Magnetic viewing film here.
And then unclick, and now it should work. Okay. I don't know if it's that much louder, but we'll see. I don't know why this video isn't that loud. All right, so he's putting a viewing film down. The idea is to show the line created. So when you look at it with a piece of ferro film, you'll see a light colored line right in the middle, and dark here, light here. And then when you put magnets together, you'll get the same effect in the sense that the new line will be where you connected the two magnets. And then the tricky part is when you connect a whole bunch of magnets together, you'll get a bunch of little lines, because now it won't work anymore. Yeah, it doesn't really explain that, which is funny. I mean, there's a video where he's supposed to be explaining it, and he doesn't really explain it at all in any kind of physical way, like why. It just says the magnet's too long. So if the magnet's too long, then it creates more lines. Well, it wouldn't if I manufactured the magnet that way. There wouldn't be a bunch of lines. So the lines are only showing up because these are magnets synthetically stuck to each other, imperfectly melding.
See that block right down that dead center. You can see that block wall or domain wall, very visible, right in the center. Oh, there's the division between one pole and another. Now let's take what you were, and I have every book ever written on magnetism, from the ancient days to books published just less than a year ago.
And yeah, you don't really get any evidence of that in any kind of sense where he pays any attention to stuff we know about magnetism. But regardless, my critique. So the important thing about what magnets are doing is, I think, to understand, is just that, yes, there's clearly an orientation difference. So you could think of it as being atoms that are imbalanced. The electrons are at one side, the proton is more on the other side, however we want to think about that, but it's polarly imbalanced. The atoms themselves inside the magnetic material are subject to alignment with all the same polar imbalance. All the south ends hit the north end, south end, north end, because of the attractive and repulsive forces in the nature of those different polarizations. The fact that one is sensitive to one kind of radiation, the other one is sensitive to another kind of polarization. So it's almost like you can almost, if I was using the Frisbee argument, and we're talking about how the filter is made, it's like the filter twists. So there's a twist in the filter. So one end ends up this way, well, let's say this way, and the other end is vertical. So it's a twisted filter. And you could just say that, yeah, every atom is that twisted filter. And so stuff goes in the bottom one way, gets converted, then goes through another filter, it gets reconverted back. So if it goes in straight, it comes out straight. If it goes in sideways, it comes out straight. As it always comes out the end filter's product. So it always leaves whatever the last thing it went through is what it's going to leave as. So if you could thought of something riding on the twisted filter, no matter how it went in, it's always going to come out the way the filter's twisted. Yeah. And so if you cut the magnet, you still end up with the ends are always going to be the same, because you're cutting at the end point. So the north end is always going to be the north end, and all you're going to change is the balance that has to exist within the magnet. So now that center line area is where the domains will switch. So if I take a magnet and I cut it in half, if I saw this down the middle, what's going to happen is the domains here in this structure are going to flip, because they have to create the new north side, and they were currently twisted south to north this way, and now they're going to have to turn or flip. So you can think of it as, all you have to do is turn it. If you think of it as a twisted ribbon, then all you got to do is twist it, and you changed it. Or you can think of flipping it. What it does, they say flip, but you know, this twist argument sort of works. So I'll write that down. I hadn't thought of it before, but the twisted ribbon as a analogy for what an atom's doing, or yeah, let's say an atom, is kind of a good analogy. So I'll draw myself a little picture of that. And it goes in that way, and it comes out horizontal-ish. Well, I didn't draw it quite right to be horizontal. There, no, it's more horizontal. Anyway, so yeah, the idea of them turning, it seems simpler, right? This seems a lot simpler than flip. So yeah, more doable physically. And when they do that flipping, that's when they're also going to release some, there'll be an effect to that, because that's obviously going to accelerate something and decelerate something else. But that's another subject. Yeah. All right, we'll play a little bit more and I'll give up. Well, permanent magnets are called permanent magnets because they're pretty permanent. But yeah, the magnetism on ferrous type magnets and what do they call them? There's a word for like a piece of steel isn't a magnet, but you can magnetize it temporarily. So the domains, the little bits, the little ribbons, will line up. But if you hit it with a hammer or just whack it, you can mix them all up again. So it's not magnetic in the sense that it's not a rigid part of the molecular structure. Like a magnet is like in ceramic, they're usually ceramic. And it's a material that's just very good at, once you freeze it, so to speak, once you lock it into the structure, it's locked and it can't move. So it has to stay in that orientation. So it keeps its magnetism because it can't, like I said, the domains can still turn, but they can't go in a different direction. So their orientation will be maintained, that kind of thing. So that's the difference between like a permanent magnet and a magnet that's magnetic for a while. So it really just has to do with, like, even the ceramic ones, if you heat them up, you can kill their magnetism. So if you get them to a high enough temperature, they'll become unmagnetic. So high temperatures will release the domains and allow them to say, fuck you, I'm going anywhere I want. Kind of a thing. So that's what makes it more and more like a filter. You can get the idea that there's a specific geometry that makes a magnet. And that geometry you can create in something temporarily because it's kind of fragile. So you can sort of, let's see, analogize it to something like what's a good example? I'm just trying to think of putting things down on a table or something, and you put them in an order. But I don't, like you run a comb across something and make it, everything will retain the shape of the cone. But all I have to do is like tap, and all the mountains fall down, all the valleys pop up, and it relaxes back to its original condition. So it's just not a permanent structural condition. Yeah, I think that's an adequate explanation. that element of it. Yeah, that's fine with that. Good enough.
Let's read off a definition of this magic line we see here, which is actually the dielectric plane of inertia, or the plane of inertia. And also,
okay, the dielectric plane of inertia, more complex stuff that doesn't really say anything. Plane of inertia. This isn't a proper use of the word inertia. Inertia is a property, and everything has it. There's no plane of inertia. This isn't. It's not a conceptually. I can't do anything with that. You know, he does this all the time. This lack. He says it's a lack of inertia. There's no such thing as not having inertia. You're always in some kind of velocity. Even when you have no velocity, it's a velocity in the sense that it's an identifiable condition. It is your inertial condition. Just not sensible to talk about inertia as if you can dispose of it or instantaneously create it, because inertia is a change in inertia is a change in velocity, which is acceleration, which requires energy, which requires the absorption of force. Oh yeah, that's just not very useful. So anyway, a couple more minutes, see if somebody else shows up, but if not, I think I'll head off to Bedlam.
Also going to tell you something new that you've not thought of before, that I'll describe in the next, or the 5th edition of my book, Uncovering the Missing Secrets of Magnetism. So here's an explanation. It's not an explanation at all. A domain wall are the regions between two domains in which the magnetic moments gradually change direction. Well, that's a nice little description. It's entirely...
Yeah, I granted, it's not any more helpful than your mush, you know. You know, but I mean, all they're really talking about is the imbalance in the atoms, the fact that it has a north and south pole, and the orientation of that is the magnetic moment. But yeah, I mean, look, they've, you know, there's lots of experiments you can do. You can, you know, I've seen in some physics lectures where, you know, you can take a I don't know, there's a word for it, like semi-magnetic material, and you know, you can run a magnet by it, and you can hear, you know, by running a current through it, you can hear the domains flip, you can hear the twist, you can hear the noise in terms of signal distortion as the magnet runs across the surface. So you can hear what you can see. You can convert the magnet. You can make it more magnetic or less magnetic, and actually see and hear that process. So it's not like the two things aren't connected. It sounds like movement. I mean, logically, that's what it sounds like. All right. Play a little bit more.
Untrue, but it's not even an explanation. So let's read off another description.
I mean, he thinks his things are an explanation. I mean, that's the irony. He talks about somebody else's explanation not being really an explanation, and then he says a lack of inertia, and that's supposed to be an explanation. Well, how's that an explanation of anything? That doesn't explain anything.
Line right through each and every magnet, and this is the universal constant in the entire universe, not just the galaxy or the Earth. The entire universe is based off of this principle.
See, yeah, you know, that's I argue a fundamental flaw is that, again, magnetism isn't the fundamental. The fundamental is gravity. That's the first force, and the gravity is what matter is condensated out of, and as it condensates, it creates filters, and the filters create the phenomenon of magnetism. So he's got the order wrong, but clearly charge is what a fundamental particle, a fundamental part of what holds atoms together. But charge, again, as I'm arguing, is just the filtering being done by electrons and protons. They're filtering differently, which means they're emitting different gravity, which means something can be sensitive or insensitive to the particular way the frisbees are flying. So again, if I'm a proton and I keep throwing frisbees this way, you know, flat, and I'm an electron, right, and my bars are going, you know, this way, all the flat frisbees go right through me. Then the external force that still has a bunch of frisbees going this way is going to push me into that proton. You get it? It doesn't happen that way. That's an analogy. There's no real such thing as push. There's absorption of velocity, which turns into acceleration. There's absorption of quanta with a velocity and a directional vector, and you absorb the directional vector, to be more specific.
One thing that holds up 100% of the visible universe is magnetism and magnetism only. It is the air and the balloon of atomic radius in picometers, if you will. Here's another insane description by modern humanity, which most people...
So again, everybody else is insane if they don't buy into this and blah, 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 but there's no, was there anything, again, the magnet isn't a standalone thing. It only has function because the field gives it function. So I mean, that's, you can't call it a thing because the field is the real first cause.
Think that we're so advanced, you know, because we have technology, that means that we're intellectually advanced, and the two of those things are two wholly different things. A block wall is a narrow transition region at the boundary between magnetic domains over which the magnetization changes from its value in one domain to that of the next domain. Well, isn't that
right? So that explanation is just saying that this line in this magnet is just the transition between filter S and filter N. And yeah, not much of an explanation. It doesn't say much, but he's not saying much either.
nice? Isn't that special? Let's take a look at these two statements about this white line right here at the center of each and every magnet. By the way, too, if I bring two of these magnets together, you'll have a single block wall. Okay, but it's the plane of inertia right at the dead center. I'll show that to you in a second here, okay? Wall, okay, let's take the word wall. Since it moves immediately, depending on the magnetic pressures, it can't be called a wall. You know, anything that is...
Well, nothing moves immediately in any of this. So again, that's not proper language. And I'd say also clearly by demonstrable experiment, they can hear the domains flipping. So it's not like this isn't something that can be experimented. There's not some experimental evidence for, is the fact that the magnets do, the little ones inside of the substance, when I break it in half, they aren't going to change in the sense that they're all still north, south, north, south, north, south. So just like this, there's no change in their fundamental, they really don't have to flip. I mean, you can sort of see that, right? I mean, if I take this big magnet here and I just break it apart, I've created the same two magnets now that are identical, and I didn't have to flip anything to do that, right? I mean, nothing substantial had to change, but the thing that does change is the amount of distance between the two filters. So when I said they had to flip, that I was wrong. They don't need to flip. Nothing needs to change. because the change is automatically going to happen because now the amount of filter material is got a new center. There's still a distance. The thing that gives magnets their strength is the fact that stuff has to travel the distance through the material and the filter. And the more filter you travel through, the more likely it is that you're going to be polarized by it. So you could just argue that the bigger the filter, the thicker the filter, the more the magnetism, but it's always going to have a center. Back to that argument, if everything's a straight line force. So there's always a center, and the center is just the point where you have as much stuff on one side, and as much filter on one side as you have on the other side. So anything going through this way is going to be counteracted by stuff filtered this way. So there's a net zeroing effect, or whatever you want to call that, in that location. But the magnets function the same. They're just weaker by half. Yeah. All right. So yeah. So I've already, so I shouldn't have said that they have to change, but they don't change. That's the whole point of the argument. Is it's all a bunch of little magnets on the nuclear level. They're already arranged, and all you're doing is measuring at one location, which is the center of gravity, so to speak, of the magnet, which is always going to be there's always going to have filters halfway between. It's like the Earth problem. There's no gravity in the center of the Earth because there's an equal amount of filter on both sides of anything at the center. There's no gravity from Earth at the center of the Earth. There's no gravity from the center. There's no gravity being produced by the Earth itself. How to say it right? Obviously, there's less gravity in the sense that there's less overall pressure on something in the very center of the Earth, in the sense that, well, there's actually more pressure, but I don't want to. In the center of the Earth, there's the change in the field is neutralized. So it's as if the Earth wasn't there, in the sense that, it's still not the right way to say it, because there is lower gravity at the center of the Earth. You're being exposed to less universal pressure because stuff is going through the filter. But the point is, there's so much stuff going through the filter. The Earth is blocking so little of the total amount of gravity that there's still gravity, in the sense there's still a force that will contain you in your shape. But it'll be the gravity of your own particles. It'll be the charge holding your own particles together. It won't be the Earth pushing you together, where the Earth is pushing you down. All right, yeah, see, I'm getting tired. My explanations are getting a little fuzzy. All right, so anyway, thank you for the comments and such. And, yeah, we'll just keep poking along here. I'll try to make these videos more focused. I mean, the Puro, with the social politics stuff was sort of a distraction. Not necessarily a bad thing, but it's just not exactly what I want to do with these rooms. And what else? Yeah, I just need to have, I want to have something more solid to offer than just doing my thinking through things. But it's always valuable. I mean, the twisted ribbon thing is a good one. So there's, I always think of things that I think are useful in these, in these rambles on the general subject. And so, but I should, I will attempt to make some of these more pointed arguments where I'm not just thinking off the top of my head. Anyway, so until the next time, and such. Use this mouse and whatnot and so forth.